Okay, welcome back to Strength Coach Tutorials. And in today's tutorial, I have a group of tricks that are going to help you display your testing data better. Let me show you. The first trick, I'm going to show you how to check whether the name in your table matches a name on your roster. So for example, if I type in a name that's not in my roster, it's going to highlight red, letting me know that that player is not on the team. Secondly, I'm going to show you how to create a drop-down where you can select the athlete's name and the date that you want the test to start on, and it's going to automatically pull out all the records that that athlete's done for that test. And you can see as I change the date, it changes the amount of tests that is actually getting displayed. Thirdly, I'm going to show you how to select the test that the athlete actually performed, and it's going to automatically update the data for that test. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to make all this dynamic in a chart where it updates the title of the chart, the dates, and the data depending on the selections that you make. So let's get after it. Okay, so as you can see, we have a worksheet that looks very similar to the one that I showed in the intro. And we're going to kind of go through this a little bit at a time, and I'm going to show you how to do all of the different tricks. To set up your worksheet, the important thing is that we've already created tables and we've named our tables. So this one over here is going to house my athlete roster. And if I go to table designs here, you'll notice that I've named it TBL_names. And then my fitness data here, I've named it TBL_fitness. And this fitness data is speed data. We have 10 meter sprints, 20 meter sprints, and 40 meter sprints. And then the date. Important to note that I've actually put a custom format on the date. So how I've done that is I just went to the first cell here, and then I went down to more number formats and custom. And in here, I've just typed in YYYY for year, dash MM for month, dash DD for day. And that just gives me a cleaner date format that's easier for me to manage when I'm looking at fitness testing results moving forward. And if I was to sort this, it's going to automatically sort it by year, and it just looks a lot cleaner. So the first trick that I want to show you how to do is we need to be able to check to see if the name in our athlete fitness testing data matches a name in our roster. And why this is important is because when we're typing in data here, it's really easy to spell names differently. And when we go to pull the data out later, it's not going to all be the same. So Excel is very fickle, and it needs all your data to be sort of uniform so that we can pull it out. So having these little checks in your workflow actually makes it a lot easier to not make mistakes down the road. So in order to do this, we need to create a formula that basically checks if this name exists in this group of athletes. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to highlight all the cells, and if it does exist, if it doesn't exist, I want to apply a conditional format that's actually going to highlight the text red. So how I'm going to do that, I'm going to highlight all the cells, I'll go to conditional formatting, and I'll make new rule, and I'll go down here where it says use a formula to determine the rule, and just like we would do in a cell, we can start to type a formula in here. And what I need it to do is I'm actually going to check to see if it matches. So what I'm going to check to see if it's an error. So I'm going to put is error. And basically now anything that I put in this box, it's checking to see whether it's an error. So I'm going to put bracket, and then I want to check whether it's going to match. So I'm going to type match and another bracket because now I'm starting a match formula. And the value that I want it to check is this first name here. But as long as I don't put any $signs with it, it's going to apply this rule to all of the cells in this table. So I'm going to start at the first one, and we're going to check all the way down. So I'm going to type C3, and that refers to the first cell of the table. And then from there, I'm going to use the indirect formula. And if you remember, what the indirect formula does is it basically converts values to their names. And this is going to be really handy, and we're going to use this formula a lot today to be able to pull the actual table names out. And when we're referring to tables, we can refer to entire columns at a time. So what we want to do is check whether C3 matches any value in this column. So what I need to do is I'm going to put indirect, and then I'm going to put a bracket to start the formula, and then quotations, and then anything in quotations in an indirect formula, it's going to take as the actual words instead of the value. So I'm going to put TBL underscore, and if you remember, we called our table names, and then for table referencing, we're going to put the square brackets, and I want to look at the athlete names column, so I'm going to type in athlete names, and then close off my square brackets, put the quotations because I want to end that, and then I'm going to close that bracket, so that ends my indirect formula. And then the last thing that the match formula would ask me to do is whether it's an exact or an approximate match, and I'm going to use the 0 to make it an exact match, and then I'm going to close that off. And then any value that it finds is an error, I actually just want to change the color of it. So I can go to font and then make it red and hit OK. So basically, if it finds an error through this formula, it's going to make it red. So I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice it didn't do anything because all of the values match. But if one of them didn't, say I spelled this name wrong, it's going to now pop up red. Unless that person happened to exist in our athlete roster. So you can see how this becomes really powerful. It allows us to check a master athlete roster to see if any of the values in it match. So I'm actually going to delete that name back out because I don't need it. And then I'm going to put this one back to normal. So that's trick number 1. So then from there, what I want to do is I want to actually create a drop-down menu. And in the last video, I showed you how to create searchable drop-down menus. And we could do the same thing here, but just to save time, I'm going to just create a normal drop-down menu. But what I want to do is pull out the names of anybody who's done a test. So you can see Dave here has done a bunch of tests, John's done a few, and then Steve's done a few other tests. So I want to pull out all of the names of people who have done tests. So I'm going to use a spilled array formula, and we talked about spilled arrays in the last video, but it's going to be called unique. So what it's going to do is pull out all of the unique values in that table. So I'm going to put equals unique, and then open up the brackets, and then the array I want to use, if I go up here, I can select a down arrow, and it's going to pull out table fitness, all the athlete names, and then if I close that off, what you'll notice is it's going to pull out all of those values. Okay, so what that's going to allow me to do is if I were to add another person in here, so let's just change one of these and we'll make one of them, I don't know, Jeffrey. And you'll notice Jeffrey gets added to our list. It's in red because it doesn't match our athlete roster, but it's going to allow us to pull that out later. So that's good there. And then the other thing I'm going to need to do is create a drop-down list for all of the dates. So I'm going to do the same thing with all the date values because you can see that some of these tests happen on the same date and I don't want to have to select it a million times. So I'm going to hit unique. And then I'll select all the dates. Now, I've already formatted this, but what you'll see is usually this will come through in just numbers, and I would go through the same sort of process. I would just highlight all these cells, go up to custom, more number formats, and I would type in the YYYYMMDD, and that would format it as a date. If I was doing this on a more complicated project, I would have all of these unique pullouts and the fitness data and stuff on a separate worksheet, and then all my data visualization would be on a different sheet. The reason I'm doing it this way is just for purposes of the video. I want to show you how everything kind of fits together. So from there, we want to create our drop-down lists. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a drop-down list here that pulls out the unique names here. So easy way to do it is I'm just going to go in the yellow cell here. I'm going to go to data validation, and you've probably heard me say this a million times at this point, but we're going to go to list, and for our source, we're going to reference the first cell where we put that unique formula, and by putting a hashtag at the end of it, what we're telling Excel is we want it to look at the whole spilled array. So all of the values that are in here, and what that looks like is it's going to be able to pull out any of the 3 names that are in there. And again, if we were to change one of these to Francis, then it's going to add Francis in there as well. So you can see how that's a pretty powerful trick. And then secondly, we want to create the same process for our actual dates. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to go to data, data validation, and we're going to go list. And again, we go to the first cell where the formula is, put the hashtag there. And again, we're telling Excel to look at the whole spilled array. And from there, we can select any of the dates that the test happened on. So that works really well. So let's pull out some athletes. Then the next thing that we actually need to do is, you can see the yellow cell over here. I've just created, I've just typed in athlete names, date, and 10 meters, and those just match the categories that my fitness testing results, or that my fitness testing table is. They don't have to, but it just helps keep things a little bit cleaner. But this isn't a table. I'm going to use a spilled array function to actually pull out data based on the selections that we've made. But the first thing I want to do is actually be able to make this dynamic so that as I add more columns to my table, that I can pull out any of the tests that we've done. So if you remember what we did with the gigantic exercise list video, we actually can reference the headers of our table as a drop-down list for this cell here. So now we're starting to put a bunch of tricks together to create something more powerful. So how we're going to do that is I'm going to go to this cell and I'm going to go data, data validation, and I'm going to put a list. And for my source here, I'm actually going to use the indirect function again. So I'm going to put equals, and then I want to look at the headers from the fitness table or the fitness data table. So what I want is indirect, and then brackets, and then quotations. Remember, we need to put things in quotations when we're referencing a name. TBL underscore fitness. And then if we were to create a named range out of a table, it always has a hashtag and then the name headers. And what that refers to is all of the headers along the top of the table. So we're going to put one of those in there, hashtag headers. And then I'm going to close that square bracket. And once you get a little bit more familiar with tables, you'll know where to put square brackets. I'm going to close the quotation and then close the bracket, and I'm going to hit OK. And now what you'll see is I'm actually going to be able to pull out any of the headers from the table. So if I were to change the test here, and maybe this became bench press, then over here I could use it as a bench press test and all the values would update accordingly. But I'll put this back to 40 meters for the purposes of this video. So that becomes really powerful because now I can store all of my fitness tests in one table, but be able to dynamically pull them out no matter what I actually call them up top here with the headers. So we only have a couple things left to do here. We need to create a function to actually pull out the values based on our selection. Now this is a pretty long formula. We're going to use a formula called filter. And I think we used it in the last video to do our dynamic lists. But I'm going to show you another application for this filter and for the spilled arrays. So we're going to start with the athlete names. And what I want to do is, based on the name I select here, I want it to pull out all of the values that match that name. So I'm going to use the filter function. So I'm going to put equals filter. And then I'm going to put bracket. And then I want to reference my table, TBL. And I'm going to use table fitness, square bracket. And I want to pull out the athlete names. Sorry, I want to pull out the athlete names so I can start to type in athlete names, and you'll see I'll actually be able to select it. And then from there, so that's the array that I want to reference. And then from there, I'm going to put a quote, or a comma, and it's going to ask me what I want to include. And I want to include any value that matches the predetermined criteria that I've laid out. So what I need to do first is, if it matches, I'm going to put in brackets TBL underscore fitness. And I want to check whether the athlete name matches the one that I've selected. So I'm going to put athlete names. And then to do that, all I want to do is equals this cell. So I want to check whether that athlete names matches that cell. And because I'm going to be copying this formula a couple times, I'm going to put $signs around where it says J2. And then I'm going to close that bracket. And that's going to allow me to copy the formula over. And then if I want it to match multiple criteria, which I do, I'm going to put a star, and then I'm going to put my next criteria in. And the next thing I want to do is check whether TBL underscore fitness, and then I want to check the date. Close that off. And I want to check whether the date is greater than or equal to the date that I've selected. So that'll allow me to select the lowest date that I want to look at, and it will pull all the dates after that. So I'm going to put a greater than and equal, and I'm going to put the date that I wanted to look at. So I'm going to select there. And again, I'm going to lock that in with $signs because I want to be able to use this formula again. And then I'll close the brackets off there. And then finally, I can put a comma, and it's going to ask me what I want it to do if it's empty. And if it's empty, I'm just going to put quotations n/a. If it doesn't find anything, that's what it's going to do. And then I'll close that off and I'll hit enter. And what you'll notice is it's going to pull out all the records. And if I change the date, it's actually going to change the amount of records that it pulls out. So if I just pull out the last one, it'll only pull out the last one there. Now, just to make it look nice, I'm going to wrap the whole thing in an if-error formula. And I've showed you the if-error a few times. And what that basically does is that any time that it makes a mistake, or any time that there's an error in the formula, it's just going to make the whole thing go blank. So I'm just going to put if-error and then a bracket. And then at the very end of the formula, it's going to ask, or this is what it's going to do. But if there's an error, it's going to ask me what it wants it to do. And I just want double quotations, which means leave it blank, and then close that off. And you can see that doesn't change the formula at all. But because we've locked everything in with $signs, we're actually going to be able to copy that formula over and use it again. So the next thing I want to do is pull out all the dates. So what I want to do is I'm going to copy this formula, go to the first cell where we put it, and I'm going to hit Control-C and then Control-V. And because we've copied it, it's still pulling out the names. I'm going to just make this centered just so it looks nicer. Because we've copied this, it's still pulling out the names, but we want to make it actually pull out the dates. So the easy way to do that is instead of referencing the name column, we're going to reference the date column. So if we go back to the beginning of our formula and I delete that out and I actually change that to date, enter, now you're going to see it's pulled out all the dates. And like I said before, sometimes when you pull out dates, they're just going to be a number value. So I'm going to just change the format on that. And I'll hit go down here to more number formats, custom, and I want YYYY, MM, DD. Okay. So now all of my dates are pulled out. And you can see it's pulled out the smallest one and everyone that's greater than or equal to that. And if I change that date, it'll pull out everyone greater than or equal to that. And just to check whether it works, let's pick another person. And you can see that it automatically updates dynamically. So you can see how this starts to get really powerful. Now, we can use the same formula. Okay, so I'm going to Control-C and then paste that. And it's going to reference the first one as a date, but I'm going to put this back to general because I'm going to pull out the 10 meter times. So what I want it to look at now is the 10 meter times. And I hit OK. And what you'll see is now it pulls out all the 10 meter times. But at the beginning of my video, I said that I'm going to show you how to make it so that you can select what test you want it to pull out. But you can see the formula stays pretty much the same. But now, when we're referencing the table at the beginning, what I need to do is wrap that in an indirect formula so that it actually references this cell instead. So what I'm going to do is take this formula here, and I'm going to type indirect, and then wrap that in a bracket. And this is the same way that we just did our data validation to create this cell. And so I want it to pull out table fitness, and then inside table fitness, that's my first set of quotations. I want it to pull out this value here. And then if I use an and, instead of 10 meter, what I actually want it to pull out is N2. And it's going to take the value of N2 and put that in there. So it'll say 10 meter or 20 meter, etc. And then I need to make sure that it pulls out the rest of the bracket. So I'm going to put another N in there, and then a quotation, and then another quotation around the bracket, close, or around the square bracket, close the whole thing in a round bracket, hit enter, and none of our values changed. But that's because it's now referencing this cell here. And if I change it to 20 meters or 40 meters, you can see that it's going to actually take out all of our tests. And just to show you how this works dynamically, if I was to add another test, say bench, and let's say 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, and I'm just going to drag this down all the way. And I've just added another test here, and now I should be able to reference that test, and you can see that it pulls out those numbers as well too. So that's how fast it is to keep up-to-date testing results databases. So I'm going to put it back to 10 meters, and I'm going to delete this column because I don't need it. And I'll insert one again, and everything's back to normal. So you can see we're still able to reference everything the way that we wanted. And this all got a little funky, so I'm just going to change this all around a little bit to make it look nicer. So there you go. So now we have our title. Okay, we can delete this cell here so that everything goes back to where it should be. Okay, so now what we need to do is, if I was to actually make a chart out of this, it's not going to work very well. So I need to actually turn these into named ranges. And I want the named range to reference all of the spilled array. So if you remember the way we created the dropdowns, we just added the hashtag. So we can do that now with the spilled array. So to create a named range, I'm going to go to the first cell, and I'm going to go formulas, define name, and you can see I'm going to call the name date, and then I want it to reference this cell here, but I want it to reference the whole spilled array. So I'm actually going to put the hashtag there at the end. And then if I want to check if that worked, I can go to another cell, hit F3, and it's going to give me my names, and I can select one of them, hit enter, and you can see it's going to pull out all the data there. Okay, it's going to pull it out as numbers because they're not formatted as dates, but we can see that it works. So a simple trick for named ranges, anytime you need to reference your named ranges, you can hit F3 and you can pull out any name range that you need. So we're going to create one here now. I'm going to go define name, and I'm going to call this test because this is the test that we want to reference, and I'm going to put the hashtag at the end and hit OK. And if I want to check if that worked, again F3, and I'm going to select test, hit enter, and it's going to pull that all out there. Great. So then we only have one more thing to do, and that's create our actual chart. So if I go to insert, let's make a bar chart. Okay. And we can now use our named ranges as part of our chart. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And if I click on the chart and I right click and I hit select data, I want to add some data here. And what I need to do is actually, because when you're putting a named range in a chart, you actually need the name of the sheet that you're working on. So I can just select any cell, and it's going to pull in the sheet name that I'm working with. But then I want to delete the actual cell reference. And I want that to be our named range. So in there, I'm going to type in test and hit OK. And you can see it's pulled in all of our test values here. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the horizontal axis, and I'm going to make that the date values. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'll hit edit, and I'll just select a cell, and then I'm going to delete the cell reference. Only delete it to where it gets to the exclamation mark, and I'll type in my name range, which is date. And interestingly enough, if I typed in F3 here, I could reference that as well, and I could just click that there, and it would put in the named range that I'm looking at. But I already know what the name of it is, and I'll hit enter and hit OK. And you can see that what it's done here is it's actually put in all of my dates, but again, they're put in as numbers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change these manually myself. So I'm going to right click on here, and it'll pull up a tab on the side where I can change the number. I'll go down here, and I've already got my custom in there. So I'm going to select custom and hit OK. But I'm going to make sure that I've selected all of them. I'll do custom. Oh, I just had to select it and unselect it, and I'll hit enter, and then I'll close this off. So now what you'll be able to see is my chart's actually very dynamic now. So if I was to select, say, John doesn't have as many records, and the chart actually updates. Or Steve doesn't have as many records. Or if I go back to Dave and I select different dates and I only want to show a couple of them, now the chart's very dynamic. So I'm going to put all the data back in. And then if I want to change the actual test, let's put the 40 meter in there or the 10 meter. And you can see how that all works. And the final thing I said I was going to show you how to do is make the actual chart title dynamic. So what I want to do is I'm going to go up here, and I'm right beside where it says chart title. I'm going to type in there, I'm going to put equals, and I want it to equal this cell here. And if I hit enter, you can see that that's actually going to put the name data or Dave in there. And then I'm going to use some tricks that we've already used along the way. I'm going to put an and sign in there, and I'm going to put a quotation, space, quotation, and an and sign. That's going to put a space after Dave, and then I want it to reference the actual test that we're looking at. And I'm going to hit enter. You'll notice that it says Dave 20 meter. And then for your chart title, if I click in the chart title box, go up to the formula tab and put equals, and I want it to equal that cell right there, and I hit enter. You'll notice that now this is dynamic. As I change the name of the person, it's going to change the chart title. So that was a whole lot of tricks thrown at you all at once, but you can see how you can start to stack some of the tricks that I've showed you how to do and create some more complicated projects. So I hope this helped you out. And if it did, I'm going to put some links to some of my favorite books and other resources down in the description. If you purchase through those links, it helps the channel out. And then also, if you could like and share this video and subscribe to the channel, that helps me out a lot. And then finally, you can find me on social media at DSMStrength, where I post all kinds of different videos and stuff that I'm thinking about training. So I hope to see you in the next video. Let me know in the comments how you found this video and if it was helpful for you, or just shoot me a message sometime. Thanks.